Hi, my name is Gwen Gardner, and I am the High Priestess of the Garden of the Crescent Moon Coven. I have held that title since 2007 when we first birthed the coven, and I received my third degree. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Boise State University, and that's where I first started on the witchcraft path back in 1987. I have studied witchcraft, shamanism, ceremonial magic, and I'm now in the Norse path, studying sage work. I have done a lot of energetic work, journey work, um, astral traveling, just a variety of different techniques in order to commune with deity and learn more about the myths. What the myths are, what really interests me, the stories and what they mean, and what's really going on, right? And so, how can we connect myth with magic? And that was how I came up with the name for my channel, because those are the two things that just captivate me in my life. So today I wanted to start with Baldr and Baldr's story, because we're now in this, when I'm doing this video, we're in the cycle coming up on the summer solstice. And this particular story is connected to that seasonal shift of the sun from being in its prime to then being after the solstice, sort of waning into the fall and the death and the winter. And so we can see the cycle with Baldr being like the young king, and well, I mean, will be king, right? He's Odin's son. He is the embodiment of the sun, a younger version of the sun, with the emphasizing those traits of being happy and joyous and spreading love and harmony wherever he goes, um, and also being connected to vegetation and being a vegetation god who then also like dies. There's that connection as well, and that's been talked about in scholarly literature as well. So anyways, we want to start with Baldr and what's going on with him. And he's having some bad dreams. And so he goes to his mother and he's very distraught about these dreams. He can't sleep, just it's very annoying. So she tells Odin and he's concerned. And so he actually goes down and visits with the vulva. And she reveals to him that a place is being prepared in hell for Baldr. And he's, obviously very upset about this news. He takes it back to Frigga, and she goes out and elicits the promise from all living beings, all the plants and all the elements of the earth, that they won't harm Baldr. Um, and she thinks that she's pretty much done the job. Okay, we've solved this problem, but she doesn't uh, actually extract a promise from a small plant called mistletoe. And this is kind of interesting, and it has to do with what's really going on in the poem, um, because mistletoe is not actually native to the Scandinavian countries, and would not have been a plant that would have probably been mentioned in an actual older story. It is well known in the British Isles, and so there's some thinking that this version of the story is a later version, and it would have included the mistletoe as the plant that ends up killing Baldr. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I wanted to kind of throw that in as something to think about. Um, so basically, once the gods believe that they've secured this promise from all living things that they won't harm Baldr, they get together and they're very happy and they're having like a party. And someone goes, "Hey, I'm going to test this out." And they throw a stone at Baldr. Well, it just bounces off and doesn't even hurt him. And so then it becomes this joke and this thing that they do where they're throwing things at Baldr. And oh, hey, it doesn't even hurt him. It bounces right off him. Um, and Loki, of course, as the antagonist of all the stories, and that, being that always has to stir things up and causes the gods to sort of stretch, right? And do things that they normally wouldn't do. Well, we definitely see this in this one because Loki goes and tricks Frigga into revealing the secret that she's elicited promises from everything except for the small plant mistletoe that they won't harm Baldr. And he's like, oh, really? Thank you. And, basically wanders off. He is in disguise. And so in the story, she doesn't know that it's Loki. But we find that hard to believe if we know about Frigg, because Frigga knows all, right? That's basically her thing. So it's an interesting thing that she is able to be deceived by Loki in this old woman form that he takes, because either she is deceived and he is able to actually deceive her, or um, she is she knows what's going to happen and plays her role in the drama. And it's unclear, which way what's really going on there. But Loki, armed with this information, then goes off and finds the the plant, which they do say he has to travel quite a long ways to find. So it's possible that they did know that it wasn't something that was actually local to the area, and include that in the story. So he finally, gains some mistletoe and fashions it into a spear. Well, if you know anything about mistletoe, you'll know that that is quite impossible to even imagine. I mean, it's not a plant that would easily lend itself to turning into something straight and long like a spear. Um, and so the idea has been suggested that the plant was originally probably some type of reed, a, a plant that would actually lend itself to that being like a long cylindrical type of item. Um, and there is some linguistic backing to that kind of idea in much of the literature. Many academics have kind of followed that back, and they think it's likely that originally it would have been some other plant. But when the translations happened, it was turned into mistletoe, and that's because there is another story in the Danish literature, in the Danish mythologies, that has Baldr and Hodor, his brother, they're being fighting over Nana. And their names are a little bit different, and I don't think they're brothers in that story. They're two different lords. And they fight. So they would be fighting with swords. And Tyne is the word for sword, and Misty Tyne might have been the name of the sword of the darker lord Hodder. And so there's this thinking that the Misteltein got translated wrong into something that they, like a plant that they knew sounded like that would be mistletoe. Um, and there's some credence to this. This isn't an outlandish idea. Many academics think that there's some credence to this. And so that the version that we got by the time Snorri was writing it down had been translated from a mixture of the two different versions, the one in more of the Norse and Icelandic versions, and then the Danish version, right? So if we know that, that just adds another layer to your knowledge about what might have been really going on. Um, Anyways, he comes back with this plant-based spear that he then approaches Hodder with. And, you know, Buddy's up to Hodder and, hey guy, how's it going? What's going on? What are you doing? And, Hodder, who hardly anyone ever talks to and is sort of left out of the festivities, is like, well, hey Loki, how's it going? Well, yeah, we're just throwing things at Baldr because he can't die. And and Loki, of course, being the great manipulator that he is like, well, why aren't you playing? Why aren't you in the festivities? Oh, well, I can't see, and I don't really have anything to throw at him. And, oh, well, here's a spear. Why don't you? Here, I can help you. Here, just stand over here and just chuck it. Yeah, he's right there in front of. Just chuck it, and sure enough, he throws the spear at Baldr, and it pierces him and kills him. And all the gods are in mourning. And of course, it's not exactly Hodder's fault, but it is. I mean, he did kill him. But they are on sacred ground, and nothing can be done at this time because, of course, when you kill someone, you have to pay the weregild, right? And so basically, there's going to be a recompense, right? He's going to have to pay eventually. But Loki, of course, just slinks off and doesn't really let his part in the scheme be known. Um, so now we come to the the little the little more interesting part, um, where we have his funeral. And there's giants there, there's dwarfs there, there's creatures from all over the earth come to mourn the passing of Baldr. They list off all the different gods and goddesses who are there. Freya in her cart with her cats, Thor with his hammer, and Thor's wife is there, Sif. And I mean, they list off everyone. And they light the funeral pyre, and Odin bends down and whispers something in Baldr's ear that we're not privy to and is not in the story. And then they're trying to push the ship, the burning ship at this time, out into the water. Oh, I forgot to mention they also kill his horse, and that Nana dies of a broken heart and throws herself on the pyre as well. And so his horse, his wife, um, obviously himself, the ring, are all on the pyre, but they can't get the ship off of the shore. And they call in the giantess, and I believe, sorry, her name might be, sorry, Hrunker. I can't remember exactly. Um, and she rolls in. She's riding a giant wolf with um, the reins are snakes. And this all in of itself has its own meanings, of course. So we want to think about what that might mean. That she's riding. I mean, this wolf is so nasty and invincible. It takes 4 of the gods to pin him down, um, or maybe the Einherjar. I can't remember exactly, but anyways, he's just massive, and they basically have to almost kill him to stop him from just killing everyone in the space. Um, and then we think about the snakes. Now, snakes symbolize rebirth in almost every culture, basically, and healing and rebirth and that whole cycle process, right? Because they shed their skin and are reborn. And those are her reins. And so she is able to, she doesn't push the ship in, she gets in the water and pulls the ship in after her and dies with the ship in the water and all the other beings. And there's some thinking, again, in the scholarly community, that she was his Valkyrie and she dies with him, which would be appropriate because she wasn't able to keep him safe, and so she dies with him. And as we go through the poem, we hear that you know Thor was so angry that he wasn't able to kill the giantess that he kicks the dwarf Leiter into the fire as the ship is going into the water, just as sort of an afterthought. He kicks in the dwarf Leiter. Well, we know that the word Leiter actually um, means something like life force, um, and we know this from when Odin, Ve, and Vili were breathing life and imbuing life into the wood, Ask and Embla, and they use that word lighter to add the color, the emanation, the glow, the life, right, into the bodies. And so we can see that as Thor's, kicking lighter in, because not only does Baldr die, then his Valkyrie dies and his life force goes with him, right? And that makes sense. And so that little piece of the poem, that's always, it's like these little things that happen, and we don't know, you know, why. What does that mean? Well, that's what that might mean, right? So that might be an explanation for that. So there we have basically Balder dies. He goes under under the water. That would be the underworld, the other world. In both the Norse and the Celtic, that's fairly common for there to be a journey on this ship over the water to the other world. And we assume that he reaches hell, and hell brings him in because hall has been prepared for both him and his wife now. And we find that to be the truth in another episode, because of course then um, Frigg has a moment where she's just distraught and decides that she will promise anything to anyone who will go and make the journey to the underworld and try to talk Hel out of keeping Baldr. And that's a whole nother story. But so now I wanted to just think about this and the ramifications of this. So we have the thinking that Baldr's death is what starts the beginning of Ragnarok, right? It's gonna this the death of Baldr, then everything that happens from there on out in the myths is leading directly to Ragnarok, and that is true. And if we think about this in terms of the seasonal progression, we know so Balder was born and grew up and was in his prime as a young god with his newly young also wife. They hadn't even started their family yet, and he's cut down in his prime, right? That is the story, really, of what happens to um, these these seasonal sun gods, right? And it's the dark that kills him off, basically, that other side, right? So we have those two sides of the coin thing going on, and this is prevalent in every culture. You can find these stories where two um, deities battle over the goddess, the sovereign seasonal goddess, who is married to the one and then will then be married to the other. In this particular myth, she dies with um, the sun god. So it ends a little differently, right? But in the Danish version, um, she doesn't. She goes and she marries Hodder. Um, I think either or that or they kill each other. Boy, I should have studied up a little bit more before I did this. Um, but uh, but there's different versions everywhere, right? So when we look at the versions in the Celtic, um, many times the sun god is killed, but then comes back, and then after half the year has gone by, that dark half where he's um, in recovery and still trying to like recuperate and become back into his power again, then um, he does, and then he kills off the dark side, um, and the cycle just continues, right? Or many of them have King Arthur jumping in and sort of decreeing that they'll battle every solstice, right? So that this is an ongoing thing, and the seasonal cycle keeps going on and on. So just a little bit to think about. I'm sure I messed up a few things, but I just wanted to get started because I've been really putting this off because I'm a perfectionist and I didn't want to put out material that wasn't like just right. But I thought, you know what, I will never do it if I just don't do it. So that's been my little version of the Baldr story for today and give you a few little things to think about. I'd love to hear some feedback. Um, Not negative, please, but like let's just have a good discussion. And if you like this, uh, definitely um, support my channel, subscribe, and I will be starting a Patreon group. And I plan to have a lot more material. I have a lot of myths that I've actually done a little more in-depth work on that I wanted to save for a little later because they're pretty deep and they might take a while. And this was more of an introduction. So thank you for your time and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.